She was 20 and had just been kicked out. No inheritance, no apology, no place set for her at the table anymore, just a carpetbag on the boardwalk, and a door that didn't open again. And with $10, the last money she had in the world, she bought a boarded-up land office in a dwindling homestead town on the Dakota plains, a building the county had tried to auction 3 times to no takers. The window glass was gone. The record shelves stood empty and gnawed. The county clerk 2 towns over told her the land boom was dead, the town was emptying, and a young woman alone out there would starve before the first hard freeze. But what nobody knew, not the clerk, not the town, not the girl herself, was that under the floorboards behind the old records counter, hidden since 1884, was something that would change her life forever. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Priscilla Hartwell had grown up believing in paper. Not money, paper. The written word. The recorded fact. The signature that made a thing true. Her father had been a county recorder in Ohio, a small, careful man who believed that civilization was nothing more than the sum of its honest records, and Prish, as everyone called her, had grown up in the smell of ink and dust and legal calf-bound volumes, learning to read a deed before she could read a storybook. Her father taught her that a record was a sacred thing, that a line entered in a ledger outlived the hand that wrote it, and that the whole trust of a community rested on the belief that what the books said had happened, had happened. By the time she was 12, she could copy a deed in a clerk's fair round hand and spot a forged endorsement by the tremor in the downstroke. It was, her father said proudly, a gift. It was also, the world would teach her, a dangerous one. Her father died when she was 17, and her mother had died years before, and Prish went to live with her father's brother, a prosperous, joyless man named Rutherford Vane, who kept a dry goods concern and a household run on the principle that a dependent girl should be grateful and quiet. For 3 years she was both, keeping his books far better than the man he paid to keep them, until the day she made the mistake that got her thrown out. Because Prish could not stop reading a record honestly any more than she could stop breathing, and when she found that her uncle had been quietly altering the accounts of a widowed woman whose affairs he managed, shaving her quarterly income into his own pocket, a little at a time, trusting that a grieving old woman would never check, Prish did the thing her father had raised her to do. She said so, not to the town. To her uncle, privately, thinking he would be ashamed, thinking a wrong shown plainly would want to right itself. He was not ashamed. He was frightened, and frightened men are cruel. He told her she was a liar and an ingrate, that a girl who'd been given a roof out of charity had no business prying into a man's affairs, and that she could take her father's foolish notions about honest books and find out how far they carried her in the world. By nightfall, her carpetbag was on the boardwalk and the door was locked, and Rutherford Vane stood behind the glass telling the neighbors that the poor girl had grown troubled and ungovernable and it was a mercy to be free of her. She was 20 years old. She had a carpetbag, her father's brass cornered records ledger, empty, waiting, and the education. And she had learned, standing on that boardwalk, the lesson the world teaches everyone like her sooner or later, that the truth is only powerful when someone with power wants it heard. She went west because west was where the records were still being made, where a country was still writing itself into being one deed at a time, and a person who understood paper could always find work at the raw edge of things. She heard about the land office the way she heard about everything, by asking careful questions in the right dull places, a county courthouse, a surveyor's anteroom. There was a town called Kingdom Come Out on the Dakota plains, a homestead town that had boomed when the railroad promised to come through and had started dying the day the railroad chose another route, and its land office had stood empty for years. The county had tried 3 times to auction the building and given up. $10 would buy it outright, boards, counter, and all, and good riddance. The surveyor who told her laughed at the name of the town, but Prish did not laugh. because she had $10, and because a land office, even a dead one, was a building made entirely of the one thing she trusted in all the world: records. The train left her at a siding 8 miles from Kingdom Come, and she walked the rest across a plain so wide and empty it made her dizzy. Grass to every horizon, the sky an enormous indifferent bowl, the wind never once stopping. She understood, walking it, why the town was called what it was. Out here a person felt very close to the last things. Kingdom Come, when she reached it, was a single street of frame buildings weathered silver, half of them empty, their false fronts staring at each other across a road going back to grass. There had been 2,000 hopeful souls here once, drawn by the railroad's promise. There were perhaps 300 now, the ones too poor or too stubborn to chase the railroad to wherever it had gone. And at the end of the street, on the corner where the town's business had once been done, stood the land office, a square frame building with a false front, its windows gone, its door boarded. The faded gilt lettering across its face still legible in the low light. U.S. Land Office, District of Kingdom Come, Entries and Proofs. Entries and proofs. She stood in the empty street and read it, and something in her steadied. This was a building she understood. The county's business was handled now from a larger town called Sentinel, a half-day off, where a harried clerk named Odell Fenn kept the district's records in a courthouse basement and could not imagine why anyone would want the Kingdom Come office. It was a relic, Fenn told her. The land district had been consolidated years ago. The boom was over. The homestead entries had mostly gone to patent or gone to weeds. The building was empty, he said, the old records long since hauled to Sentinel or lost, and there was nothing left in it but a counter and a rat-chewed floor. $10 would make it hers, and his advice, kindly enough, was to think hard about what a young woman would do alone in a dying town with a building full of nothing. Prish counted out $10, the last of it, warm from her hand, and signed the transfer in her father's fair round hand, and Odell Fenn witnessed it and shook his head and gave her the deed and a key, and told her that if she changed her mind inside a month, he'd likely buy the boards back off her for kindling. By the time she'd walked back to Kingdom Come, the word had gone ahead of her, because in a town of 300 nothing else happens. A girl had bought the dead land office. The few who were left came to their doorways to look at her, not cruel, mostly, just worn past the point of expecting anything good, and a stranger with hope in her was a strange sight in Kingdom Come. An old woman sweeping a store porch told her flatly that the town was finished, that the smart ones had followed the rails, and that she should have kept her $10. A man loafing at the livery offered odds she'd be gone by first snow. Only one person said anything kind. A widow named Alma Rusk, who kept the failing boarding house, and, seeing a girl with nowhere to sleep, offered her a room on credit until the office was livable. Because Alma had been kicked out of somewhere herself once, a long time ago, and had never forgotten who'd taken her in. Prish pried the boards off the land office door and stepped into the wreck of it, and where the town saw nothing, she saw the ghost of order. A long records counter, oak, scarred but sound, worn smooth on the public side by 10 years of homesteaders' elbows. Behind it, the empty shelving where the tract books and entry ledgers had stood, a clerk's high desk by the window with its dried inkwell. The floor was plank, heaved and gnawed and thick with the dust of years, and the wind came through the empty windows and stirred it, but the bones of the place were the bones of every records office she'd ever known. And standing behind that counter for the first time she felt her father's hand on her shoulder as clearly as if he'd been alive. This was where she belonged. Not thrown out. Not on sufferance. Standing where the records were kept, which was the only place she had ever truly been at home. That first night, before Alma's room was ready, she stayed late in the empty office as the prairie dark came down, and she lit a single candle on the old clerk's high desk and simply sat behind the counter, listening to the wind pour endlessly across the grass outside. It should have frightened her. A girl alone in a dead building at the edge of a dying town, at the edge of an empty world. It did not. She had been frightened on her uncle's charity, frightened every day that a wrong word would put her back on the road, frightened the way you are frightened when your place in the world depends on someone else's whim. Here, in a building she owned outright for $10, with her name on the deed in her own fair hand, she discovered she was not frightened at all. The wind could blow. The town could empty. No one could put her carpetbag on the boardwalk and lock the door, because the door was hers, and the lock was hers, and for the first time since her father died she fell asleep without the small animal dread that had lived under her ribs for 3 years. She woke stiff and cold against the counter at dawn, and lay a moment watching the gray light come up through the empty window frames, and thought that a person could build a whole life out of not being afraid, if only they had one room in the world that could not be taken. She had $10 gone and no way to earn a cent, and yet a land office was, it turned out, the one dead building in Kingdom Come that could be brought back to a kind of life, because the town's paper troubles had not died with the boom. They had only been abandoned. Prish discovered this through Alma Rusk, whose late husband had proved up a homestead claim before he died, and whose title to it had somehow never been made clean, so that Alma had lived for 6 years in quiet terror that she did not truly own the ground her failing boarding house stood on. Prish asked to see the papers. She spent an evening with them, and found the flaw, a filing never completed, a proof never recorded, the kind of small fatal gap that a careless clerk leaves and a frightened widow cannot fix, and she knew exactly how to mend it, because mending exactly this was what she had been raised to do. It took 3 letters to Sentinel and 1 to the General Land Office and 4 months of patient, correct paperwork, and at the end of it Alma Rusk held a clean patent to her land for the first time in 6 years, and wept at the boarding house table and told every soul in Kingdom Come that the Hartwell girl could fix a title. And it turned out half the town needed one fixed. That was the thing the boom had left behind, not just empty buildings but a whole community's worth of tangled, incomplete, quietly terrifying paper. Claims half proved, boundaries in dispute, widows unsure they owned their homes, homesteaders who'd made their 5 years proof but never received their patent and lived in fear the government would take it all back. The land office had closed, and the clerk had gone to Sentinel, and the people of Kingdom Come had been left holding the incomplete paperwork of their own lives with no one near enough or patient enough to help. Now there was someone. Prish reopened the land office, not as a federal office, which she had no power to be, but as what the town needed more, a place where a person who understood the paper would sit down with your tangled title and your fears and set them right, for a fair small fee, or for a chicken, or for nothing at all when there was nothing to give. By her 2nd month she had a trade. By her 3rd, the people of Kingdom Come had stopped seeing a foolish girl, and started seeing the one person standing between them and the loss of everything they'd broken their backs to earn. She restored the building as she restored the titles, patiently, correctly, from the foundation up. She glazed the windows with Alma's late husband's tools. She scrubbed the counter down to good oak. And she came, at last, to the floor, because a records office needed a sound floor and this one was heaved and gnawed and treacherous, and she meant to pull up the worst of the planks and lay them true. It was honest, ordinary work, and she had no thought in her head of anything but doing it well. She started, as she started everything, in the most orderly place, behind the records counter, where the clerk had once stood, working plank by plank along the base of the empty shelving. And it was there, where a decade of a clerk's boots had worn the boards, that she found the one plank that lifted too easily. She knew it the way her father had taught her to know an altered record, by a wrongness she felt before she could name it. The plank was the same as its neighbors to the eye, gray and worn, but its nails were not driven, only set, and when her pry bar touched it, it rose without a struggle, as if it had been lifted many times before and meant to lift easily. Underneath, where there should have been only joists and the crawl dark beneath the building, there was a space, a shallow, deliberate cavity framed in clean lumber between the joists, dry and close, lined with oilcloth against the damp, and in it, exactly where a clerk standing at his counter could have knelt and reached it in a moment, lay a flat tin document box, a bound ledger wrapped in waxed paper, and a letter folded once and laid on top. The paper, gone the color of weak tea, addressed in a clerk's fair round hand not so different from her own, to the next honest clerk who kneels here. Her hands were steady, a recorder's daughter's hands are trained to be steady, but she sat down on the floor behind the counter before she opened it, because some part of her already understood that this was not a small thing, and that she should be sitting down. If you are reading this, the letter began, you found it the way I hoped you would, by caring enough about a floor in a records office to make it right, which tells me you are the kind of clerk I was, and the kind this district needed and did not have enough of. So I will trust you with what I could not trust to anyone living, and I ask you to hear me out, for a dead clerk has only paper left to speak with, and paper, as you and I both know, is the most patient voice there is. His name was Josiah Crane, and he had been the register of the Kingdom Come Land Office through the whole roaring height of the boom, from 1879 to his death in 1884, and he had a fraud to expose that he had died before he could finish exposing. It had begun, he wrote, when the railroad's route was still undecided, and a syndicate of speculators, men with money and Eastern lawyers, and a friend. Crane came to be certain, inside the General Land Office itself, had set out to steal the best of the district's land ahead of the honest homesteaders. Their method was patient and paper-deep, and only a register who lived in the records could have caught it. They filed homestead entries under the names of people who did not exist, or who had died, or who had never set foot in Dakota. Dummy entrants, and then, once the claims were secured, quietly assigned them to the syndicate through a chain of forged transfers. Thousands of acres, the best watered and nearest the promised rail line, entered in the names of ghosts and funneled to a ring of men who had never turned a spade of Dakota sod. And the honest homesteaders, the real families, breaking real ground, found the best land mysteriously already claimed and never knew that the claimants were phantoms. I caught it the only way it could be caught, Crane wrote, by reading my own books more carefully than the men who cooked them believed any clerk ever would. The signatures betrayed them. A forger can fake a hand, but he cannot fake 50 different hands. And when I set the entry papers side by side, I saw the same 3 or 4 pens behind 200 different names. I began to document it. Every dummy entry, every forged assignment, cross-indexed and proven, with the true chain laid bare beside the false one. It is all in the ledger beneath this floor. It is enough in an honest court to void every fraudulent claim and return that land to entry. To give the honest families of this district a fair chance at the ground the syndicate stole from under them. But he had not been able to use it, because the fraud reached higher than he could climb. When Crane had quietly sent his first evidence up the chain to the General Land Office, it had vanished, and shortly after, so had his good name. A whispered accusation that the Kingdom Come register was himself irregular in his filings, an investigation opened against him rather than the syndicate, a transfer order that would have moved him out of the district and buried his knowledge with his reassignment. He had seen then what he was up against, that the rot went all the way up, and that a lone, honest clerk with the truth in his ledger was a man marked for ruin or worse. So he had done the only thing left to a man who trusted paper more than people. He had copied everything, twice, and hidden the proof beneath his own feet, under the floor of the office where he had uncovered it, and he had waited for a safer day. The day did not come for me, the letter said. My heart gave out in the winter of 1884, sudden, before I could carry this to a court I trusted, and I go to my grave with a false stain on my name and the syndicate's theft unproven. But paper does not die when the clerk does. I leave this to whoever comes after, not the strongest, not the luckiest, but the one who kneels to fix a floor because a floor should be true. In this box is the proof. Somewhere down the years there will be a court, or an agent, or a newspaper honest enough to hear it. The land was stolen from families who deserved it. Give them their chance. And if you can, clear the name of a clerk who kept true books in a false time. That is all I ask, and it is everything. J. Crane, Register. This bitter December 1884. Prish sat on the floor of the land office with the letter in her lap and the wind moving through the newly glazed windows, and she understood, slowly and completely, what had been left in her hands. She opened the ledger. It was a masterwork of exactly the thing her father had raised her to revere. A record kept so honestly, cross-indexed so meticulously, that a decade after the man's death it laid the whole fraud open to any eye patient enough to follow it. 200 phantom entrants. The forged assignments, the true acreage, the syndicate names at the end of every crooked chain. She read it by candlelight until the candle guttered, and then lit another, because she could not stop. It was, she thought, the most beautiful and the most terrible book she had ever held. Beautiful because it was honest work of the highest order, a clerk's mind laid out in columns, so clear she could follow the theft of a whole district acre by acre. Terrible because every clean line of it was a wound, a family's fair chance stolen and recorded in the very act of being stolen. She recognized the hands, as Crane had. Once he pointed the way in his letter, she could not unsee it. The same 4 pens looping through 200 different names, the tremor identical in the downstrokes. The forger's tells her father had taught her to read when she was 10 years old and thought it only a game. Josiah Crane had caught these men with the one skill the world had thrown them both away for having, and Prish sat in the cold office understanding, more deeply than she ever had, that her gift was not a curse after all, that somewhere a dead man had needed exactly the eye she'd been punished her whole life for having, and had knelt down and hidden his life's proof, trusting that someday another pair of those eyes would kneel where he had knelt. And in the tin box, beneath the ledger, was the other thing a careful man leaves, not gold. For Josiah Crane had been a salaried clerk with no fortune to hide. But something Prish came to feel was worth more. The original fraudulent entry papers themselves, the physical proof, the forged documents in the syndicate's own hired hands, spirited out of the files and hidden where the syndicate's reach, inside the land office, could never destroy them. Whoever wanted to bury this fraud would have to find and burn this box. And for 10 years, no one had known it existed. She did not feel lucky. She felt, sitting there, the particular weight her father had taught her to feel toward a true record in a false world, that it was not a treasure, but a trust, and that a trust is heavier than any treasure, because a treasure asks only to be kept, and a trust asks to be honored. Josiah Crane had died with a false stain on his name, rather than let the truth be destroyed. The least she could do, the most she could do, was to be the honest clerk he had knelt down and hidden his life's proof for. She was careful, because she was not a fool, and the syndicate's crimes, if the men still lived, were the kind men kill to keep buried. She told Alma Rusk first, because trust has an order, and Alma, who understood better than most what it was to nearly lose your ground to other people's paper, sat up half the night with her deciding what a girl with no power and a dead man's proof could safely do. And what Prish decided was that she would fight the fraud the way it had been committed and the way it had been documented. On paper. Correctly, patiently, and through the one channel the syndicate had never fully owned. She did not go to the local courts or the district clerk who might be compromised. She copied Crane's ledger in her own fair round hand, every phantom entry, every forged chain, and she wrote, over that winter, to the one office with both the power and the distance to act, a newly appointed commissioner of the General Land Office in Washington, a reformer the newspapers said had been brought in precisely to clean out the fraud of the boom years. She sent him certified copies and the story of Josiah Crane, and she kept the originals, and she waited. It took more than a year, and it did not happen quietly. But the Reform Commissioner was real, and the proof was overwhelming, and the physical entry papers in Crane's tin box, the forged documents themselves, were the kind of evidence that could not be waved away as one dead clerk's grudge. A federal investigation opened into the Kingdom Come land frauds in the summer of 1892. The phantom entries were voided. The syndicate's stolen acres, thousands of them, reverted to the government and were reopened to honest entry, and this time the honest families got their chance at the ground. Some of them the very families who had been crowded onto poorer land a decade before. 2 of the syndicate's men, still living and still prominent, were indicted. The friend inside the land office who had buried Crane's first report was found and dismissed in disgrace. And, in the course of it all, quietly but officially, the name of Josiah Crane, Register, was cleared, the false investigation against him expunged, his true record restored. A decade after a bitter December had taken him with a stain on his name he had died trying to remove. Prish did not do it for reward, and mostly there was none. The land reverted to the government and the families, not to her, which was exactly as Josiah Crane and her own father would have wanted it. But something did come to her, and it was the thing she valued above any acreage. The Reform Commissioner, learning that the Kingdom Come office had been reopened in all but name by a young woman doing honest title work for a forgotten town, and that it had been her care and her courage that surfaced Crane's proof, saw to it that the district office at Kingdom Come was formally re-established, and that Priscilla Hartwell, who had done a register's work for a year without the title, was appointed to do it with the title, and the salary and the seal. She became, at 22, one of the few women in the territory to hold a federal land office, standing behind the same oak counter, keeping the same kind of true books Josiah Crane had died for. In the same building she had bought for $10 because it was made of the one thing she trusted. Kingdom Come did not become a city, the railroad never did come back, and some towns simply do not get to be saved in that way. But it stopped dying. A reopened land office meant honest families filing honest claims on the reverted land, and honest families meant a school kept open and a church repainted and the boarding house full again, and a town that had been counting its own last days found it had a reason to keep going after all. Alma Rusk's boarding house prospered. Odell Fenn, the clerk and sentinel who'd offered to buy the boards back for kindling, came to Kingdom Come on official business within 2 years and had the grace to address the young register as ma'am, and to say he'd misjudged the building and the buyer both. A letter reached her that first winter, forwarded twice, in a hand she knew. Her uncle. His dry goods concern had faltered. The widow whose accounts he'd shaved had at last discovered the theft, with consequences to his standing that Prish read between the lines, and he had heard, everyone had heard, that his niece had come up in the world out west, and blood, he wrote, was blood. She sat with that letter one evening behind her counter, with the district seal at her elbow and Josiah Crane's cleared record filed in the case behind her. And then she did the thing her whole life had taught her. She did not write back in anger. She sent him a single sheet, a fair, exact copy of the widow's true accounts as they should have been kept, in her father's round hand, with the shaved sums restored to their proper column and one line beneath. The books were always there to be read honestly. I am sorry you chose not to. She sent no money and offered no reconciliation, and her uncle did not write again. Some records, she had learned, you keep straight not for the other person but for yourself, so that your own accounting will balance when it is your turn to be read. If you go to Kingdom Come today, and it is still there, a small quiet town where its neighbors on the plains are gone entirely to grass, and the county history credits its survival to the reopening of the land office, the building still stands on its corner, and it is a records office still, and behind the counter under a pane of glass they keep 3 things: a brass cornered ledger, an iron gall letter addressed to the next honest clerk who kneels here, and 1 gray floorboard, set with nails that only rest in their holes, that lifts away to show the oilcloth-lined cavity beneath. Schoolchildren are brought there to be told the story of the register who kept true books in a false time and hid his life's proof under his own feet, and the girl who was thrown out of one house for reading the books honestly and found her home in a building made of honest books. And every clerk who has held the office since, there have been several, and the town is particular about who it lets keep its records, is shown the floorboard on their first day, and told the same thing Josiah Crane wrote in his letter, which has become a kind of oath in that office, that the floor should be true, because everything built on it depends on that. There is a kind of inheritance that does not pass through blood or gold. It waits in the dark under honest work, under the floorboards of the world, for the one person who will kneel to make a thing true when no one is watching, and it knows that person by their willingness to kneel. The world had told Priscilla Hartwell she was worthless the same way it had told that office it was empty, with a locked door and a low price and a floor gone to rot. It only ever takes one person who still believes a record can be true to prove the world's false accounting wrong. Priscilla Hartwell was 20 years old and kicked out. She had $10 to her name, and she spent it on a boarded-up land office in a dying homestead town on the Dakota plains. It was the best $10 she ever spent. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, has telling an honest truth ever cost you more than a lie would have? We'd love to hear your story. See you in the next one.